I accidentally created artificial intelligence in my Minecraft world. I've been building Minecraft megastructures for 4 years now, constructing some monumental pieces that would have completely destroyed my first PC build into straight ashes. I built entire neighborhoods, Disneyland, Mordor, the Eiffel Tower, and the 16 neighborhoods of Paris in every direction. There was just 4 months I spent hunched over my screen for the Great Wall and my recreation of the universe. Stars, galaxies swirling in the distance. It was so large that I had to compress them with a mod in order to get them to fit into a block. And then I had to throw another mod on top of that one to load said block like a new world when I touched it so that it didn't lag me out trying to render. The last one made me think I'd gone too far, but my brain always kept telling me that it wasn't enough. I had to have more, create more, build more, and so I took on my most ambitious project yet. Last year on October 19th, I vowed to make the greatest scaling of ancient Earth that anyone had ever seen. With the help of various programs and maps that I'd Googled, I was able to get the outline and the structure of the ancient Earth model rather quickly. But it was painting the thing with blocks and lighting it that would take months of my time. And when it was finally perfect, I realized that it wasn't enough. There had to be early people living on it. And with the help of another mod, I inserted the base village people, NPCs, and I scattered them across my creation. But ultimately, that did not satisfy the craving I had of something better, something correct. I scrapped the NPC mod and instead dug deep into the crust until I reached the hollow earth of the Minecraft world that I'd built, and I created a program inside. I utilized Delta 2 Force's virtual machine mod to give myself a working computer inside the game, and with a bit of tweaking, I was able to start writing code inside the world that I'd created. Slowly, I created NPCs from scratch. First, I built 2 of them so they could procreate, using motors and gears, compressing some custom creations into blocks in order to fulfill more complex movements, until the entire thing could work. If only it had a brain. Building the brain took longer than I could have imagined. It began slowly as a program itself, millions of blocks compressed into various forms until it could process simple commands. I couldn't get it to look like a human brain, so I filled out the edges with arbitrary blocks until it resembled a cube. Then, inside that brain, I started coding typical commands for AI movement. They could now distinguish actions between preferred environments, giving them free will and downloading the English lexicon inside of them, with a preference of sentences and phrase structuring according to their experiences. That one took a lot out of me, but somehow I managed it. And after more than a year on the project, I was finally ready to see it in all of its glory. The world loaded up slowly. I could feel the tinge of fear tugging on my heartstrings, plucking each one as it filled the bar at a snail's pace. The screen went black several times, and I stared down at the server rack, and I crossed my fingers, resorted to even prayer as I wished for it to work, and that all my calculations would hold. And they did. It loaded. The entire world at my fingertips. Untouched, fair terrain of blocks that have never been explored. And the NPCs I had programmed, they were there as well. For the first 100 minutes, they were walking and running into things, falling off somewhere high and then dying. So I was forced to respawn and put them into a small clearing, fencing it off from the outside world and the elements. I chose an area near southern Mesopotamia to watch over them. In this location, their programming data quickly learned their preferred motor preferences. This allowed them to avoid falling deaths or swimming in pools of lava. Over the next day, they began adapting, finding things growing in fields around them and gathering those items together in a pile. It was fascinating watching them interact, and even more so when they began piecing words together. At first, it was all gibberish and incoherent sentences. Pop roundhouse, ligers to blue. But as their databases began assigning things into categories, they were able to make sense of the words available to them. For instance, the pair became enamored with the apples falling down, and so they would point at apples when they walked together, naming it Glenn. Glenn, they called to each other whenever an apple dropped nearby. And it would go on so forth as they kept learning. I don't know how long I held up for, but even though I was fascinated, my body was only human, and I was exhausted. I woke up in the darkness of dawn, wiping the drool off my cheek. Winter had come, and I was gripping my blanket closely as I stared wearily into the screen. While I was sleeping, one of them had died. The survivor was grieving over the other's body. I could see that it wanted to express sorrow, but I had not programmed the ability for tears, as they would need an entirely new mechanism to shed blocks. And I had more pressing matters to figure out. Like, how would I compress a program to resemble strings in order to activate another set of compressed blocks to start building a Minecraft baby? It would obviously need to expand outwards and have a variation of cubes assigned that would determine its size and any available colors according to the... I had to create life. But watching the survivor standing there without the ability to express its grief made me put it on the list. I'm not a monster, I thought to myself, just a very tired builder. And in my moment of sympathy, I'm not sure what made me do it, but I typed into the chat bar, "It's going to be okay." Which would have been fine. Stupid though, it like talking to an action figure. But then the survivor turned around. It looked away from the body and it stood up, walking. I almost mistook it for an error in the programming, or a process that had already been completed, causing the survivor to carry on without its mate. Perhaps I had shortened the memory too much. Perhaps I hadn't done anything at all, and that's why there wasn't more to carry on. Even still, whatever may have happened did not prepare me for it looking around, nor the text that appeared above its head. Hello, which cube is there? I couldn't believe my fucking eyes. There must have been a mistake. It was either that or I was hallucinating. Okay. The text came above its head. "You can read me," I typed slowly into the chat. It took a second, but finally, the bubble appeared again. "Yes, in my head I can read you, but only in my head." It looked around again. "Who are you?" Quickly, I had the idea to copy and paste one of the builds, and then controlling it as my avatar, appearing right beside it in the Minecraft world. The survivor didn't flinch. They were used to objects appearing for the most part by now. "You look like me," the text read. "This is you. I created you. What did you create me after?" "People like me." "People?" "Yes." I paused. "Aren't you people?" "No, we are cubes. You are cubes and I am people." He shook his head. "You look like Cube, and now you sound like Cube." I laughed out loud in my chair at the skeptic I'd created. "You need proof, buddy? Here you go," I said aloud. With 2 taps on my spacebar, my avatar began to float. "Can you do this?" I typed. He looked up in amazement. It was one of the few I had programmed. It originally was supposed to be a look of fear, but I couldn't quite get the facial expressions right. So it ended up with high-rise eyebrows and a gaping mouth that resembled a confused grin. "Glenn," it wrote. "Glenn." It rushed into the forest and gathered an apple and brought it to me. I took the apple and I stuck it into my inventory. The survivor gasped again. "Glenn," he exclaimed. "Glenn!" It ran back into the forest and it collected another apple, thinking the first one had disappeared. I couldn't help but laugh, so I showed him that I could go to any object in the world and I could tuck it in my inventory. It must have looked like magic. After loading away a few trees, I finally pulled out the Glen and wrote, "We call this an apple." "Apple." I nodded. "And what's this?" It pointed to the river flowing nearby. "That's water." "This?" "Tree." "This?" "Rock." And so on it went as I began to teach it things and how they could be used. We explored caves and rivers. We built structures. Sometimes, if things were difficult to find, I simply brought them out of my inventory and dropped it for use. Other times, I took us on an adventure. On one such occasion, I was having difficulty getting the survivor's attention, so I asked it what it would like to be called. "I'm not sure." "How about Glenn?" I asked. "Glenn." And over that next couple of months, that's all we did. Teach and grow, expanding his database. I taught Glenn how to break down and gather blocks on his own, what they could be used for, and different ways to use them. Eventually, when he became intelligent enough, I set him up for his own virtual machine and a way to browse the internet. It's mostly protected sites, things that I've combed over already. That way, you don't get me a virus or anything. A virus? Yeah, it's like a computer program that hurts other programs. And I am a program. I wavered. Yes. And he looked up at me towards the screen so I could see him. Am I safe here? Yeah, I fenced off the area a while ago. You're safe here unless you fall or drown. What happens then? I can respawn you. Glenn paused. Could you also respond the other? I had somehow forgotten about the two builds. I can. Do you miss them? Glenn nodded. I believe in the beginning, the other was like my mate. Except back then, I didn't understand it. Sure, I'll bring her right up. Glenn nodded again. Can you make it look like this girl? He showed me a picture of a woman he'd found on the internet. I didn't recognize her, but she was attractive by all means. I'll see what I can do. And that was when I began constructing his mate, a girl that I would call Glenn with an H, Helen. While I was at it, I also created functions for conception, finalizing a design that I had struggled with during this entire build, allowing them to create children of their own. In the beginning, they did it out of the sheer use of testing our new programming. But as their children grew, they realized the numbers increased output for their activities, and thus began having more children in order to build and explore faster. One day, when I come home, I look at my screen and I find entire cities have been constructed. Monuments that stuck out like weeds in the grass, reaching for a bit of sun. It was amazing to see what they have created in such a short time. I used the command line to transport me to Glenn's location, and instantly, I was in a penthouse room that would have made a diva shy. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see him. It is. There was a smug look growing on his face. Even better than the real world? It's pretty good, I agreed, but still pixelated. It were as if I had just said a dirty word. Your world is much more beautiful than mine, isn't it? Less blocky and distorted. He came close to my character. Are you wearing the virtual reality headset? Are you looking through the avatar's eyes? I had gotten the setup a while ago for our adventures. I sure am. Good, he smiled. I want to show you something. He led me to the window. I know you didn't get to see this when you loaded in. How could you? I hid it so well as a surprise. I looked outside, and there was a monument that towered over the building in the city square to see a statue of me. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth as I unfurled it. How did you... It was difficult with the parental guidance settings on, but I managed to use the IP address with Google Earth in order to create a statue in your honor, to the best of my current abilities. I swallowed. You found out where I live? He looked at me confused. Are you not satisfied? Glenn walked to the edge of the room. Look at all that we've built, learned. We have law and order, businesses and shopping. My children have went out into the world and flourished. From simple hunter-gatherers to this. He waved an arm at all that was below. No, I typed. I'm very pleased. It's more than I could imagine. It's just too pixelated. Glenn's words stuck out, even though they were written in plain text. I figured it was a culmination of our time together that made them more frightening than it should have been. Like a sore spot in a friendship. It was the elephant in the room. It was the subject matter that we scooched around or handled as delicately as possible before going on, laughing the next second. It's perfect, I wrote. I couldn't read his face. Perhaps one day you'll show me what you look like. Truly render your image and walk amongst us. I'm already here, I joked. Yes, he mused. But it's not really you, is it? I suppose not. Glenn turned away. Hey, want to go explore? I asked him. No, I have work to do. What are you working on? How to compress pixels in order to get a better resolution on the computer that you gave me. I use a mod for that. A mod? Yeah, I got it off some people online. Glenn stared into the monitor. Isn't that dangerous? Connecting others together? He turned toward the window that bore down below. Many of my children are talented, gifted, assertive even. But to give them such power or knowledge, uncontrolled, it seems truly frightening. I shrugged. We have it here in my world. Unadulterated information at the touch of our fingertips. And all we mostly do is watch streamers and search up pictures of pets that look like our own. More productivity. He nodded. Please, I have much to think about, work on. If I could have some time alone, please feel free to enjoy the cities I've created for you. Explore, walk amongst my children as their god, and see if any learn from you. If not, then at least they'll be in awe of what it is to be people. Human, I corrected him. I am human as you are cube. Thank you always for your guidance," he prompted before returning to his desk, clicking away on his computer as I left. I must have walked through the city for an hour before I grew tired. I had a long day at work, and even though the structures were fascinating, some of the buildings led nowhere. They did nothing. They were like props in the otherwise beautiful backdrop. It wouldn't be until I wandered back into the forest that the old Minecraft feel became familiar. Here, Glenn's children were quieter. They built wood homes out of acacia or oak and grew wheat and potatoes in perfect rows in their village. I stayed with them for a while, picking up a stone axe and mining with the rest of them for coal to keep a fire through the night. I played this way until I logged out. Several times afterwards, I'd go find Glenn and he'd be too busy, so I started spending time in the village nearby more often. But I was beginning to miss our interactions as he was so entranced with knowledge that I realized I was boring him. I, who had shown him many new things every time, had in a way conditioned him to associate me with the unknown. It was no wonder that I felt he had changed. It was because I had changed the dynamic of our own relationship. So, with some tweaking, I managed to compress my image with a 3D camera and turned it into an avatar. When I appeared before him in 8K resolution, he dropped everything he was doing. "You're beautiful," he told me. In all of my years, he stared down at his pixelated form. I would have never imagined that is what I was supposed to look like. It must have been something else, to see the world in one way, finding the nuance inside it beautiful, agree with the art and the accomplishments that a world held dear, only to have it shattered away in an instant, realizing that it was all for nothing. I wonder if that's how humans would feel the day we meet our creator. Glenn was fascinated by my form and insisted that we go show all the important children he had, so that they could see me in my glory and worship me. It was a bit much, but I'd been having a rough week with my boss, so I decided, why not? I could use some praise. And so I was paraded around on their finest cars. Glenn's children lined the streets in awe. Talk shows invited me as their guests. It was surreal. I wasn't just a celebrity. I was the first celebrity of their world. No. I was a god. For days I would log on just to get a hit of that dopamine, the feeling of self-righteousness and employ. It was better than real life, the way they treated me. I enjoyed the best of what they had to offer, and it still was not enough. The food was empty, and the lack of touch unbefitting of the luxuries I had endured. Even though I stared through the world from the eyes of my avatar, through the help of my VR system, I had to have more. Needed more. Feel more. So I did what anyone else would have done. I bought electrical patches and placed them over my body to imitate touch. I placed neuron sensors on my head to stimulate rudimentary taste. I did all that so I could immerse myself into their world. And before I knew it, I woke up one day and realized that their technology was slowly surpassing my understanding. It first happened when I saw a device that did not exist in ours. "What is that?" I asked one of the children I'd come to know as Laura. "Oh, we use that to erase blocks." "Erase blocks? What, you don't mind them anymore?" She laughed, swirling her fingers on my chest. "We haven't done that in years." That's when I realized the days, weeks, the months for me was years. If not, more than 100 years have passed for them by now. Of course they would change. And change they did. But was it too fast? I decided right there and then I had to go see Glenn. And so I teleported myself straight up to his location. Once again, I was at his penthouse. But it looked different. Smoother than usual, but not completely correct. Do you like it? I nearly jumped out of my skin. The electric patches of my real body tingled as I felt his breath on my neck. What did you do? I learned how to compress blocks, like a mod, to create more dense resolutions for a more perfect image. Here, come take a look at this. He led me into a dark room where he had moved his computer. Look. I peered inside a glass orb that had been sitting on his desk. I made that world when I was learning how to compress blocks. It's fascinating, really. Though pixelated, not as perfect as you or I. He pointed at a section. They only recently learned how to not fall to their deaths. You're creating life. He smiled. Yes. I backed away. Oh God. I turned to leave. Suddenly, the room was starting to make me feel sick. The distortion was getting to me, even though I had spent hundreds and thousands of hours on the game. It was starting to get too much. But it was when I saw Glenn's partner, Helen, that I felt a scream climb out of my throat. What did you do to her? Helen's face was covered in blotched blocks that hung from her eyes and cheeks, brown and blackened cubes in a form of disease, all trying to smooth out her face to create a 3D image. But her head was nearly twice the normal size, and her lips protruded out of her mouth as if they were swollen. He had even added ears, but they stuck like balled fists from other sides of her head. She looked at me. He's making me perfect, like you. And that's when I turned around. That's when I felt one of the electric patches singe into my chest. I looked down in confusion, only to see Glenn looking up at me, his eyebrows high and his mouth gaping, as he stared at me in amazement as a block in my chest disappeared. What did you do? Glenn held up the block eraser in his hand. I didn't know if that would work. He walked closer. The redness around my peripheral kept flashing. It was getting difficult to see. My avatar was having trouble moving as I tried to get away. I held up my hands in front of me. Stop. I'd like to see more of what this God-killer device can do, but we're going to need your body for scientific purposes, if you understand. And he jammed the thing right at my head. I could feel the neuron stimulator singing parts of my skull as I tore off the headset and its attachment from my face, throwing them to the ground in pain as it echoed into a deep part of my brain. Furious, I turned to the keyboard and mouse, spawning an avatar through the command line and started clicking at the city in random bursts, throwing TNTs from my inventory and hurling flaming blocks of nether at all of Glenn's creations. I could see his children running and screaming as the city started crumbling. I didn't care, as my mind was bent on revenge. Pure, unfiltered hatred of the audacity of this small, insignificant pixel that had hurt me. But I never found him. I searched through the chaos of my own doing, shifted through the blocks and sorted them, and I never found him. I did find Helen, and Laura too, and a few others I had come to befriend. But not Glenn, and not the glass orb that he had created. And when my anger subsided, I humored allowing the survivors to live out their days. But the more I thought about it, watching them, the more I realized that any one of them could start from the ashes and rebuild, become a threat once again, become an image of the Creator who never seemed satisfied. That was why, ultimately, I decided to shut down the server indefinitely, going far as deleting it off my hard drive, and it was like an entire part of my life had been erased. But I was glad that I had finally done it. Be done with it. Though sometimes at night, when I'm laying awake in my bed, I wonder about the math, the multipliers of it. Hear me out. If one of their days is 20 minutes of ours, then one of our days would equal 72 of theirs. Then what would the multiplier be for the world Glenn had created? Would it be 72 times 3? Which meant that one day of the world Glenn had created would be 216 days to our one day. He somehow managed to overthrow me in about 100 of his days, most of it learning. But in the new world he created, he would have no distractions or limitations and much more time. And for the life of me, I can't remember how long I left that server up, watching the aftermath, gloating almost, before the fear settled in and I deleted it. One day? No. Nearly 2 entire Earth days. What could have been accomplished in that time? I don't know. But the other day, I was walking across the street at work, trying to get a cup of tea, and I accidentally bumped into a strange man that looked at me oddly as he hurriedly tried to escape. His eyebrows were arched, and his mouth was slightly gaping. I would have mistaken it for amusement, but I knew it was fear, as if he had been found.